Hello, and welcome to Culture Conversations, the podcast where we explore the people side of work. I'm your host, Megan Robinson. For years, I've found myself deep in discussions about workplace engagement with industry experts. Now I get to share this wisdom with all leaders, new and experienced, on their journeys to build cultures that maximize potential. We spend so much of our lives at work. Let's make it a place where our teams can grow and succeed. Hi, I'm Megan Robinson, and welcome to Culture Conversations. Today, I'm going to have an amazing conversation with Andrea Herran. She is brilliant at working with organizations of all size, but really taking the lessons that she has from some of those smaller organizations and looking at culture, employee experience, values, and understanding how do we bring that to the forefront? How do we have really intentional cultures? And how do we make sure that our values are truly aligned? Because that is a deeply personal feeling, deeply personal experience, and making sure that we're bringing that to the business world with intention and clarity. So I want to introduce Andrea. She is the founder and CEO of Focus HR. After 25 years of helping businesses grow and expand their teams successfully, she's now renowned for her ability to bring out excellence in every team. And I love that focus on teams. She has degrees in business and psychology and vast experience with working with organizations and companies of all sizes. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here.
I'm so excited because when we were chatting right before we started recording, having this conversation around values and company culture, I feel is happening a lot, but also not really with a lot of intention or not a lot of clarity. So I'll ask you, how do you help organizations, especially in the work that you're doing, clarify their organizational values?
Thank you so much. It's quite interesting because all companies have a culture, whether or not it's the one that you created or your team created. So we work, right now we work with a lot of companies that are still founder led, which is a great dynamic because as the founder of a company, I'll give you a shortcut. The values of the business are typically your own personal values. Now, yes, not all of your personal values translate into business, but some of them really do, and they do great. I'll cheat here for a second. One of our corporate values is curiosity. Always wanting to learn, always wanting to dig in, ask questions, learn about people, learn about the company. So everybody on my team has to be curious
Ooh,
because
I
that is part of who we are.
I love that alignment between that values of the things that you personally value. And it sounds like obviously curiosity is something that's always
Yeah.
served you and something that you really pride. How do you think that aligns with expectations?
Well, you know what? And that's what you have to do because it's one thing, you know, yes, can we make a poster and put words on it and throw it on the wall and say, hey, here are our values? Here's the thing, the words, because everybody comes from a different background, everybody has different experiences. So everybody's going to see a word and interpret it differently. So, in order to get clarity and consistency across the team, is you have to say, what does that look like? And I personally like to have two buckets. One is how does that look like with the outside world, our clients, our customers, our patients, depending on your business? And what does that look like internally? Because it may look a little bit different. So, for example, curiosity with our clients is asking about their business. How long have they been doing it? How did they get into it? Talk to me. And when we talk with their team, I don't like using the word employees. I always use team. Talking with the team members of like, why did you decide to work there? And that curiosity. Internally, that curiosity is, hey, I've got a question. Who else can help me? And reach out to the team and ask, because we all have expertise and experiences in different areas. So if by chance they run across a new situation, it could be like, hey, has anybody ever worked with, for example, living wages? You know, We don't run across that too often. But when we do, it's like reach out to the team, be curious, ask.
Yeah.
And then if anybody has that experience, they will step forward. Or if they haven't, they'll say, I haven't, but I know there is a speaker or a podcast or something on it that you may be interested in,
Uh,
that kind of stuff.
I love defining that curiosity, or even we'll say any of those values in those behaviors and actions. And I was just recording an earlier podcast. I'm sure you'll we'll be able to reference in the show notes, but about setting those expectations. And I think when you start identifying what those values are, and you start breaking it down into the behaviors that you want to see, you start uncovering some of those hidden expectations you have. You expect your team to reach out to the internal resources. There's other
Yes,
organizations and other teams that's not part of their culture. They may say
right.
curiosity because they want them to go out and research and find the answer, but it's that very different interpretation of what that looks like and how that aligns with your expectations for the word is so crucial. Um,
Yeah. Well, it is. That's why I say everybody looks at a word and will come out with a different meaning of what it is. So if you don't define it, you're not going to get that consistency
yeah,
across the team, because while we have values, we also, and we have what those behaviors look like, we also want to respect that the diversity of thoughts within the team, and we're not looking for 5, 10, 15 robots that all look at the world the same way. We need that diversity of thought because, as you know, in any organization, if you don't have the diversity of thought or the diversity of the way they look at situations, the world, the business, you don't grow. It's very stagnant, you know.
yeah, it's incredibly stagnant. It's funny because I always do an exercise oftentimes when I'm starting with an organization, we're doing some of their early defining leadership work. I'll ask everyone that's in the workshop, great, here's our one of our core values. What does that look like for you? What does that mean for
Yeah.
you? How does that show up in your role? What are the things
Yeah.
that the actions and behaviors you can do that align with that value? So they start to make that internal connection to it. Because I'm always a big believer that you have to bring the rest of the team in on that. And I know you are too, right? You can't just put
Oh,
the walls up there, say these are the
absolutely.
values, and how you start to get that engagement with them to make that clarity, it starts shaping that culture. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and one of the things that I like doing, especially if the organization has been around a while, well, as you know, when it's founder led, the way the founder started the business and the way it looks, even 10 employees later, is different because models change, behaviors change. You learn things from doing things and you've had to adapt. So one of the things I like to do, if they're open to it, is okay, this is what you say the values are. You know what? Let's go to your team and ask them. And and I do it in a survey just because the analysis makes it easier. Is real simple. Give me 4 distinct words that you use to describe where you work to your family and friends. I had to change it to 4 distinct words because I'll get people give me a sentence or they give me the same word 4 times, so adjust. And what that tells you 2 things. One, what they value about the company, what they see as important, or if it's a negative, what's holding you back, and is it a match? When you see what they come back with, is that actually the culture that you want? Because if you're not intentional, your team will decide what the culture is. Every company has a culture, just may not be the one that you want.
Do you have any stories or examples of that disconnect
Um, yes, let me see
or
if I can remember all the
surprises?
details.
I know,
It
I threw
was,
that one at you because I'm fascinated. I work with another tool, a coefficient platform, and that's we were doing a meta-analysis. We did some presentations on that. And that's always the biggest takeaway is what the senior executive leadership team sees or how they
yeah.
interpret the culture, the behaviors, everything. They're looking at it through rose-colored glasses. And when you
Oh,
start to have
yes.
that stark difference and you pull the data apart, you say, this is what your frontline employees think, this is what your managers think, it starts to really paint some different pictures.
It really is because the further away they get from the front line, that's what happens. So, Yeah, a CPA firm. They just went through big growth. It's great group of people. Everybody loved their job. Great togetherness, and leadership was like, well, this is what we see as our values. So then we went back to the team and did that exercise and showed them. And I'm like, okay, we're seeing some differences. There was some of it is just, verbiage, it's like, yeah, basically means the same thing, which just means we need to define it better. There was some negativity in there. Part of it, I'll be honest, is the industry because CPA firms, they work crazy hours, basically mid-January to April 15th, you know. And then
Timing
again
for this survey
in,
is really big.
yeah, that we did the survey, it was actually shortly after the busy season on purpose.
Yeah.
They wanted
Yeah,
to
it's
wait
under
longer. I'm like, no, no,
stress.
no, 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 because we want to know what they're feeling during the stressful time. Um, and then there's another one in September, October. And we saw some negative. And it was like, we spent 4 hours, 4 months, sorry, working crazy hours. But it's like then they all forgot how light their summer is, how they've got Fridays off. They have, you know, they there's a lot more. You actually get more time off when your family is off. There's a lot of young families. So they had more time off when their families were off in the summer. So they were missing that. I'm like, we're not bringing this out enough. We're not showing that, yes, we know the winter months, you're kind of tucked in here, working like crazy, and I'm in the Chicagoland area. So there's a big difference between winter and summer. And then the summer months, you get to be out when people actually want to be out, and you're stuck inside when it's minus 30 below. So, and then
But
part
it's
of it too is
interesting. It gives you a lot of
how they
direction.
communicate it.
Exactly how they're celebrating it, how they're recognizing it, how they're
Yes.
reinforcing it.
Hmm.
Wow. And that's a really nice, smaller shift that they're able to make that doesn't change the culture. It just changes that perspective.
It does. So we looked at communication. So we started doing like an internal, not really newsletter, because it wasn't, this like now people can use Canva and do that. We didn't do that. This was quite a while ago. Um, and but we did like I think it was bi-weekly, like education based on the values. So we would have external articles. So it wasn't always somebody internally telling them things. It was, if it was something on time management, we'd pull something up from like Franklin Covey or about the Eisenhower matrix or things like that. If it was about how to speak as a leader, here's some things from Simon Sinek, things like that. We pull out outside resources to show that, it's not just us. There's people out there that specialize in this, and we want you to have their knowledge too.
That's that's wonderful. I love that you're able to bridge those two connections in a really authentic way.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously we'd read through things, make sure that it fit what we were looking for. And it's not like just like, oh, here's some random
Here's a
person that's
buzzword.
saying things. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I think there's
I'm not a
this.
fan of buzzwords.
No, no. I think we've been pretty buzzword-like so far. I love the questions. How would you describe it to your family and friends, and how you're really making sure that what leadership or that founder, especially, they're bringing those personal values to the party. We're all bringing our personal values, but they're really putting them front and center, are aligning with what that culture is and basing in that reality.
Yeah.
How have you ever had to deal with, or how would you deal with someone that has maybe some values that doesn't align with the organizations, or maybe some of the values that you need to reject or reframe for leaders?
Well, here's the thing. I'm going to look at this from two different points of view. One is in the recruiting process. You need to ask some questions that will help you understand their values to see if they match. Because you can't just say somebody, so, you know, great talking to you today, Megan. What are your values? People
It's like
go,
asking your team what motivates you.
yeah, yeah, it doesn't work. And so based on your values, you need to find interview questions that still relate to work to help understand and where their values are. Now, just a little caveat there is please listen to the answer in full. And I say that because people hear part of an answer that they like and they stop listening and they don't hear the rest of it. And sometimes the rest of it gives you more information. This is from 35 years of doing this. Now, if the person is already in, because let's say as an organization, you've decided to really define your values, start living them, and this person's already been there a while and they seemed fine before, but now that you have this framework that you want to follow,
Yeah.
they're starting to see they don't really fit. Typically, one of two things happens. One usually happens a lot more often than you would think, but people will be like, I'm out. This is not who I am. This is not what I want to be about. This is not something that met because values are deeply personal. They're not situational. It's not something like it only matters here but not here. Values are it's these are the hills you fight on, kind of things. So because values are so personal, if somebody doesn't match and you're constantly reinforcing it, talking about it, they will 8 times out of 10, they will bow out. They're like, you know what, this is great. I enjoyed working here. These values don't fit. I'd rather find something that fits, something that's more aligned to my values.
I think there's a
They
really
don't say it that
nice,
neatly, but it basically they that's what it is.
well, there's that kind of secondary push, particularly if you've identified those values and you've done that hard work and you've started to define them with those behaviors. And I will throw expectations on there because you have those values, you've defined the behaviors, you're outlining what you expect from your team. And now you almost have kind of that performance management edge to it where you're able to say,
Yes,
okay, these behaviors aren't aligning with our values. And I'll say I'm personally working with a client that their leader came to me and said their behavior does not match the values of this organization.
exactly.
And we need
And
to
if they
change the
don't bow
behavior.
out themselves and you start having conversations about it, usually the other parts, the 2 of the 10 that end up sticking around, their peers will start pushing them out.
Because the
Because if
frustration
they
is there.
strongly align and they have somebody who's not, they'll be like, you know, for example, if of course now I'm drawing a total blank, but let's say one of your values is like especially in professional services, you know, you need to get back to clients in a certain amount of time. You can't get an email or a phone call and wait a week to return their call. You know, again, I'm drawing on my own. We respond within 4 business hours. Doesn't mean we have the answer, but we respond, we acknowledge within 4 business hours. So if you have something similar, whether it's 24 hours, 48 hours, really wouldn't go past that, but um, just from a customer service perspective. And so if people don't start responding like within that time frame and somebody else has to pick it up and take over, they'll be like, hey, that's your client. Why didn't you get back? Or hey, this is your responsibility. Why are they reaching out to me? They're saying that you didn't respond. You know,
Puts
the
pressure
peers
on.
will end up taking care of it. Yeah.
Wow. Because you work with a lot of founders, and I'm really kind of honing in on this because I think there's such a interesting divide and I'll even say bias that goes into
Yeah.
that founders, and I'll say values, but I'm going to even say just perspective, the expectations that they have that sometimes work and sometimes don't work. And I'll say, I
Mhm.
remember a client a long time ago, and they were really looking at their values and what's important. And I had to look him dead in the eyes. Because on one side, he's telling me, oh, as long as the work gets done, that's what matters. And it was an agency. So we all know agency life gets really crazy. As long as the work's done, right? As long as we've got the work, that's what matters. And then in the next conversation, he would start griping about time cards and how people, didn't have full time cards or they were only working 38 hours a week. And I mean, I remember when I was in agency life, my time card was at least 60 hours a week. And so hearing kind of both sides of him talking of like, okay, well, which one do you care about? Do you want to have overworked time cards? Is that really your expectation? Or is the expectation that the work gets done and we're okay? Because we can't have it both ways. And I think that was really for him
Yes.
the value of what hard work looks like and kind of that expectations of entitlement or however you want to phrase it from other people or they don't know the meaning of hard work are all starting to come out. I love all of your right. I'm sure you've heard all of these from people before, all of the complaints.
Many times over.
So how does that align or how does that work its way into its values?
It, it, it is contradictory, and first of all, I would say, especially like with an agency, because it gets contradictory because their business model traditionally, I'm sure there's some that aren't as traditional, is based on billable hours. This goes for agencies, this is for CPAs, attorneys, you know, those kinds of professions. So they say, yeah, as long as the work gets done, but then they see a drop in billable hours. And my response to them is be honest with yourself as to what is important. It's be honest. Your focus is on billable hours, right? And so then I convert it from billable hours to utilization rate. How billable are they? Are they 80%, 90% billable, things like that? It's like, if that's what's important, let's talk about that. Let's not talk about as long as the work gets done. Maybe so let's talk about that. It's like, be honest, it's okay. There's a place for everybody to work and for all kinds of people. Some people are not going to like the fact that there's pressure or there's an emphasis on billable hours. And other people will be like, yeah, it makes sense to me, whatever. It's okay. But you have to be clear. Or I would ask them and say, when you say as long as the work gets done, are you referring to the fact that they don't have to be at their desk from 9 to 5 and you don't care if they do it at 3 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock at night? Are you referring to it doesn't matter what time of the day they used to do it? Or, because sometimes people are like, I don't care when they do the work, as long as they have the billable hours, the work gets done. Because there's people that, one of the things we learned from the pandemic is work-life balance. And that has a different definition per person. Everybody has their own definition of that. Um, so some people will be like, you know what? I have learned that I am really on top of things, from like, I don't know, 4 a.m. to 11 a.m. They can crank it out in the morning and that's great. Talk to them after lunch, the food coma has set in and their brain is mush. Others are like, nope, I'm a night owl. I will do it at night. I prefer to do my heavy thinking, strategic type work after the kids go to bed. So does he mean it doesn't matter when the work gets done, as long as it gets done? Is he referring to hours? What hours of the day they utilize to do the work compared to actual billable hours? So I know I'm cutting walking a fine line there, but I find that people will say one thing when they mean something else. So it's more like, what do you mean by that? Are you referring to the billable hours or are you talking about the time during the day that they do it? For example,
Yeah.
like when people say, oh, we lack communication. That's huge. Communication field is like this big within a business. So what communication I always go back with, okay, do you mind if we try to narrow this down a little bit? I go, it's hard for me to figure out how to fix communication. So can we narrow it down? What communication do you feel is lacking? Give me some examples because that I can work with.
I love that focus, I think, and that's really the theme from this conversation for me is the more clarity. that you get with that,
Yeah.
the more specificity with it. And especially for that owner, that founder, that leader that
Mhm.
has very much built this business, getting clear with what those values are, making sure that those expectations, those behaviors are aligning to it. And again, that clarity, that transparency, especially if it feels contradictory or you're finding that you're having that tension with it, is being honest. And
Yeah.
I echo that with you as well, as just being honest with it, because you cannot change your values easily. You have to make sure they align. You have to make sure that everyone's able to own and internalize them. But if you
Yeah.
are going to have those sticking points, you had better be clear about that from the beginning, all the way from the hiring process through implementation.
Oh, absolutely. And even involve it in I'm not a big fan of annual reviews. I like things more frequently. I call them check-ins. Uh, we work with some companies that run on EOS. So part of their 555, I think it's called. One of the first questions, it's like, how have you demonstrated your values? How have you demonstrated the corporate values, in your work? Where do you feel you're strong? Which value do you think you need some more support on?
Love that. Love that question. You can get that personal review as well as a
Yeah.
filter for everyone to use that.
Yeah.
Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation, Andrea. What are some last bit tips or ideas or words of wisdom that you want to share when it comes to this?
I think the biggest thing, and we've been saying it all along, is define it. Go beyond the word. It's people look at values as one word. Add some sentences. What does that look like in the behaviors that you express externally to clients or internally to each other? When you define the behaviors, that's where the magic happens. The word isn't enough. You have to explain what it means.
I I could not repeat that more. That's beautifully said and very succinct. Thank you. I could repeat it more. I won't for everyone's sake. But thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and expertise. And if you are listening to this and you're like, man, Andrea really knows her stuff. Especially if you're that founder, that business owner, especially those smaller organizations where it's so much is riding on your back, where you are that face of the business, where you are starting to really build out those cultures with intention and impact. I do recommend that you reach out to Andrea and her team to get that support, to have someone that's going to push you further, help clarify that thinking. Because I guarantee if you think it's clear, you may think that you are absolutely crystal clear. It is muddy. It is, and you're laughing because
Absolutely.
you've seen it all. Like, no, we already said that. We don't need to do that again. You're like, I have no idea what this means, and
Yeah.
everyone's afraid to tell you. So please do use those resources, get that outside perspective, make sure that you have someone that can really help you clarify that thinking, really clarify that communication, however you define communication for you and your team. Thank you for your time today, Andrea.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Culture Conversations. I'm your host, Megan Robinson, founder of eLeader Experience, a professional leadership development company. Today, we shared actionable ideas to navigate the evolving workplace landscape, compete for talent, and build cultures that maximize potential. If you're looking to learn more about how to support your organization's leaders, you can learn more about our work at eleaderexperience.com. Now get out there and contribute positively to your organization's culture with your own conversations.